Hi, everyone. Hello, my name's Doro. I'm a trainer here at ISS, part of the product management practice. Good to see so many of you here this Friday afternoon. I see some alumni, friends. We have two of today's classes with us as well in the back. Yeah, so it's been a while since Amit was here last time, maybe like about a year almost. And since then, he's been keeping really busy, traveling the globe, actually various speakings at organization, university, and also published a book. Congrats on that. So we're actually really excited that we could make this happen here today and have all of you here as well. A couple of logistics. So we'll shortly start our talk. And then after the talk, I think the two classes in the back, you'll have to go back to class, unfortunately, right? But the rest of us will continue with a bit of Q&A. And then after the Q&A, maybe around 4 p.m., we'll wrap up here and we'll go upstairs to the bistro. We prepared some food and drink, and looking forward to catching up with all of you and do a bit of networking there as well.
Okay, we can, I think you can all hear me. This is loud and clear. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Excited to spend the Friday afternoon here with me? Yeah. Okay, that was like little like, no. Come on, I'm the one who just ate such a heavy meal and came here, and like my daughter was like, stay awake, this will be fun. So this is going to be an interesting talk, very different from the kind of things you generally learn. I've been on the road for the last almost a year, talking to startups, education institutes about product management and how things that I've learned over the years working at different companies. Generally, when I start one of my sessions, I tell a story. It's always fun, right? You get to know me, I get to know you a little bit. And I wanted to talk to you about the fact that, last week, me and my daughter, she's sitting behind, I was getting my butt kicked in a Muay Thai boot camp. That's where I came from. So spending a full week there. But then something different happened this morning. So I'm cutting that story, and something more interesting happened, brought the memories back from exactly something that happened 13 years ago. 13 years ago, I was actually a student of NUS. I did my MBA from here. And this was the session. We came here for 2 weeks, and I had to actually present to the vice president of Experian the project that me and our team had worked on. Stressful 2 weeks. I eat a lot when I'm stressed. And guess what happens? I'm getting ready for my presentation early in the morning, and the pant doesn't fit me. So my entire presentation that I'm doing, if you see the pictures that they have, I have one hand here. I'm kind of walking my way through that. That was 13 years ago. This morning, trying to get ready, open my suitcase, I actually cannot find my pant. This was like, I did not even dare to call my wife to ask her if I forget it there or I lost it somewhere in the transit. Fortunately, I had a backup pant. So I'm still dressed up well for the presentation. Otherwise, you might have seen me in shorts doing this thing. So that's a little bit about me. A lot of my presentation will have these little silly, fun things that I've also picked up during the years, through my journey. So this is what we are going to talk about. Understanding product management behind the scenes, at the 4 companies that I have worked at. I generally start with something very interesting here. Anybody can say what's common across these things? A quick shout out. Feel free. I've heard interesting things here. They have a lot of my pictures is the wrong answer, though it's technically also a correct answer, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. Anybody's used any of these products? All the? The man companies? Oh, no, they are all from the 4 companies I worked with. Yeah, they're all from FANG products. But the key thing here is that almost all of them have not been the most successful products here, right? And sometimes I think the most interesting learnings come from working on products that did not do well in the marketplace. So it's very counterintuitive, right? Because that's where you start understanding what goes wrong, right? It's the same engineers, the same people, the same processes. So why did we end up creating some of these products? So I'm not going to do like an introspection reflection on these things, but it's been a great way for me, working across 4 different organizations who have had very successful products and some not so successful products. I don't call them failures because they did quite well, but not compared to some of the other products, these organizations have shipped. So it's always been interesting to reflect back, and I do that quite often. And it's also part of when I coach students, I tell them, hey, you should definitely read some of these case studies to understand what went behind them and how people reflected on it. A little bit about me. It's a pretty crowded slide given I've spent 30 years in the industry now working for my first big job was at Digital. This was like the little mainframe mini computers organization, pretty big company for the time it was there. This was back in the early 90s. Most of the computers were bigger than the podium. They had tapes in them. We even had to throw punch cards once in a while because they were just those legacy systems. So it's interesting when I look back to my first programming assignments to literally the vibe coding that I'm doing, it's poles apart and just like one generation of my life. And the other names should be very familiar. Pricewaterhouse, a very standard consulting organization. I spent a couple of years in Australia in their technology consulting group. Most of my time actually I spent at Microsoft. I think of the 30 years, over 18 years I spent at Microsoft in a number of products across the spectrum. And then working at Sun Microsystem. Anybody heard of Java? Probably yes. So I got hired back in 97 as one of the first system engineer based out of Bangalore. So saw how that language has really taken off and changed the way people started thinking about programming. Google, another, I think most of these names are fairly familiar. Started working at Google on the Android team. Gemini is not the Google Gemini. This is the crypto exchange by the Winklevoss brothers. So I also got a chance to dabble a little bit working in a very different technology. Like I've always been working on developer tools and products. This gave me a very different perspective to see how products are built in a very, very small organization compared to all the other organizations that were extremely large. So that balanced out a lot of my experiences. Same thing, Amazon, part of my job was very internal focused, how to build tools for an internal organization, the HR team. So I did all of the tooling for the student program hiring. That was the team that I was part of. And it gave a very different perspective on how do you work with stakeholders, how do you get feedback, how do you improve your programs. Academically, I got my dual degree from the NUS UCLA program, almost 10, 12 years ago. Did my master's from University of Sydney, Western Sydney in Sydney, and my undergraduate was in India. I've been traveling a lot. A little fun project that me and my family have put together is called Microbit Adventures. People who talk to me about product management, one thing they hear a lot is that I really emphasize that people build something. The best way to learn is to actually build something. There's no substitute, there is no excuse to that. And so this was something me and my daughters put together, a small educational site for students, very young kids to learn programming while not actively learning programming. It was using a BBC microbit device, a fun device, and we created a fun story behind that and had kids really involved in that. And that's my family. I live in Seattle, my wife, my dog. My elder daughter works at Walmart. My younger daughter is hiding behind there in the corner. We're just doing a little trip together before she goes to college and starts at the University of Illinois. So this has been a little bit about me. Now we can jump straight into the talk that you're interested to hear about. So product management, right? Many of you might be studying, many of you might be active practitioners of product management. And one thing, I think all of us agree that product management is done differently across the board. Even sometimes in the same organization, you'll find product building and design happening very differently compared to another department, and obviously changes based on the size and scale of the organization. But the most common thing, like as students, when you're learning product management, you're thinking like, oh, it's all about how do I do features, roadmap, user stories, right? This is how you frame product management in your head. But the reality is that that's just the table stakes. Like that's the easy part of product management. Right? You can all go pick up a book, go find something. The hard part is actually everything else. Now the question comes is, what really is this everything else here that I'm talking about? So a lot of product management is about customer engagement. How as an organization or how you as an individual are understanding your customer. Like the most foundational basic thing in building a product is doing that. As you're building your product, there is the aspect of being able to deliver something to your customer very, very quickly, right? But it has to be quick, it has to be high quality, and that's where you have to start understanding how my team or my organization is investing in engineering systems and the data behind that. Like, how are we making decisions? How quickly do we know what my customer is doing? How can we respond to them? A lot of the unspoken product management is all about the leadership style. If you have worked in any organization, you will start seeing, we call it the DNA of the organization. How Bill Gates worked at Microsoft was very different from how Steve Ballmer worked at Microsoft, and very, very different from how Satya runs the organization. And their leadership style, how they operate, how they make decisions, plays a very important part in how organizations actually build and ship products. The other very interesting thing, and this I spend a lot of time actually understanding this side of product management, is about how do organizations actually motivate, reward their engineers and product managers. It's a very, very hard problem. Right? This is not a problem where you can actually measure the productivity of somebody. It's not an assembly line. How many bricks did you move from here to there? How much did you assemble? A lot of times, when you are working on something, you ship something, it takes a long time to get the feedback and the value that you're bringing to the customer as well as to your organization. So understanding this, how companies do that, is very, very critical. Interesting things happen in the industry. You do sign-on bonuses. How do you poach people from other organizations? How do you keep people happy is important. And then you'll also see that most of these companies have built very interesting rituals and culture around how they do things on a day-to-day basis. This is their lingua franca, right? Everybody in the company talks about that. If you're at Facebook, you'll talk about hackathons. If you are working at Amazon, you'll always talk about the leadership principles. Every discussion, every meeting will have that. And that forms a very interesting common thread across the entire organization on how things happen. So over the next 35, 40 minutes, I'll basically spend time kind of dissecting how some of these big companies, when you see them from the outside, they may look very different. And so I'll share my perspective on each of these companies from the inside. And I generally start with this slide. Like, this is very funny, very cheesy. It's not my creation. I actually found this almost 12, 13 years ago on Twitter. And these were basically, somebody came up in a funny way showing the org charts of different organizations. Okay. Of course, nobody at Microsoft holds guns, but it was a very reflective thing on the fact that they had created what we call the baby Bill cultures. There's the Bill Gates, and there were the small VPs, always trying to fight over a little bit of territory. This is how people perceived them, which basically meant that the cross-group collaboration was actually a very, very weak point in the organization. On the other hand, you had Amazon, which was literally a very top-down company. This is how Jeff Bezos ran the company. This is how Andy runs the company. And Facebook was a mismatch of, pretty much young, dynamic organization. Let's get things done. There's no structure. We don't want structure. They had the very classic startup mentality. And Google was this big thing about, I can work on this 20% project. I can have this manager. I can contribute here. Very flexible. Now, you can take this in a light thing, like, oh, this is fun to watch. But the essence behind this is that your organization structures will really, really impact strongly how you build and ship your products. So most of the senior execs that I work with, I spend a lot of time understanding and asking them about how they have actually formulated the organization, how do they see it, and then you talk to people on how they see it from the bottom up. And it's generally very, very different. So let's start with Microsoft. I called it the OJ of product management. There are a lot of stories talking about how product management came about there. And that's actually one of my first pictures back in 95. I got hired to work on Windows 95. And so I found that, and I thought I'll throw in and date myself and age myself as well by showing that picture. So Microsoft basically started the whole product management thing, even though for many years, I don't think they called it product management. We were all program managers when we started. But they came in from a very interesting space. They were always working on these developer tools. Their strength was basically building tools for developers. And most of the engineers, right, they were just engineering organizations and sales organizations, could very well build something that they used, right? So you are your customer, you understand how I'm going to build my products, how I'm going to create a compiler. Once they actually moved into the space of Excel, so this is a story from Steven Sinofsky that I saw in one of the blogs. That's when they realized that engineers really don't understand how a person sitting behind a desk, doing financial modeling, is really going to exploit and use Excel to the greatest. Right? You can still build everything. You know how to build grids and arrays and things. So they started hiring these people called the program managers, who then would understand the customer and then translate the requirements and give them back. And that eventually kind of evolved into a full-blown product manager role, which is essentially taking your feedback from the customer and making sure your engineering team understands that. Microsoft also, as an organization, plays on their biggest strength, which is enterprise. No other organization matches how much money and time they invest in making sure the products are ready for the enterprise, which largely means security, it means compliance, accessibility, globalization, and support. They support organizations for years, right? I first left Microsoft back in 2013, went to Google. 2015 or 2016, I get a call from one of my colleagues, and he says, "Hey, we were thinking about you today." And I'm like, out of the blue, maybe they want me back, they're giving me a job. And it's like, no, 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 no. We basically found a machine which was your build machine. So we were building embedded Visual Basic on that. And they kept that machine alive for 15 years because that's the level of support an organization can expect. Very few organizations put this kind of investment. I think Microsoft just rates the highest in terms of offering that. Of course, today, most of the companies are doing the same thing, good support and everything, but they set the bar very high. Also, when it comes to building products, innovation is the key thing. Bill Gates started this thing called the Think Week. 2 weeks, everybody in the company gets to write their ideas, put them in a form of a document, and Bill Gates would read and review each one of them. And some of the ideas that were good were formed into product teams. The others would be, okay, improve or do something, for a later time. And then Bill Gates himself, spent a lot of time doing things like call them the Bill G reviews, where you would go present to him, and he'll criticize your product like anything. But that was the whole point. He had visibility into everything the whole organization is doing. Sometimes two teams might be building the same products, quite interestingly. And he would then be able to decide, hey, this team has actually done a better job, and pick that product to continuously be refined. To make people happy, Microsoft did something called the Ship It Awards. Something I'm really proud of. I had so many of these. Every time you ship a product, a little plaque comes to you, and you can just, they're like good bragging rights to have. But as an organizational leader, you have to think about, what are you doing to motivate your team? Something that they can remember, something that they can, share with friends, family, and, talk about it. Microsoft also created pretty early something called the Microsoft Garage. We used to have a place where we could go tinker with things, build stuff. I don't think it was anywhere close to the kind of things like hackathons and all that Facebook does, but I think it was a good foray to kind of make people understand that they can come together and build something. So it's all about driving innovation, coming up with new ideas, because that's the hard part. As a big company, you have to continuously innovate. And so you have to create these engines, that will help you. On the customer empathy side, again, Microsoft extremely strong. Like everything from telemetry, which is like as I'm using the product, data is going to Microsoft to understand, how I'm using the product, where am I getting stuck, what are some of the parts that are not getting used or used more than the others, so we can improve the product that way. But then programs like the Microsoft Most Valued Professional Program, having people in the community who go spend time with other leaders, bring feedback back to the product managers, was a very big investment. Even more interesting was something our team did many years back called the Frontline. And in this program, what they would do is take the product managers and actually have them sit at a customer site for 2 to 3 weeks. And all your job was to actually just sit with your customer, understand, be part of their workflow, and see how they're using your product. See what they're trying to achieve, right? Not just observing what they're doing, but what really is the problem they're trying to solve, and then come back and build great solutions for that. Very expensive, but I think it drove a lot of innovation in our team in the Visual Studio org to improve our features really well. And then getting feedback from either the insider programs, getting people together, asking for feedback from them, having enterprise customer councils. And most importantly, I think the most painful one was forcing people to eat your own dog food. This was a terminology I learned back in Microsoft. The idea was, as we are building the products, we have to use them as well. So if Exchange comes out for the customer, everybody has to use that. If we are using Visual Studio for the customer, we should be using the same ID internally and not try to use something else. Because there's no better way to build, a product. And then, perks were interesting. Again, something that keeps people motivated. I do talk about this because this is both useful and interesting. Microsoft had amazing healthcare at one time. They would cover practically every cost for a person on the healthcare side. It doesn't happen now as much, but these perks were there. And then I found very interesting when I started at Microsoft in 2000, they used to do a free soda. Like we had these big, walls with different type of soda vending machines out there. Some of them are even branded. So as we shipped our products, we will get some of those custom-made, soda cans. And this was quite a thing because, I came from a consulting company. In a consulting company, they nickel and dime a lot of things, which is fine. That's how they work. You go and ask for a pen, for example. You got to do a requisition. That's what I had to do. And I go to this lady and I need a pen. And she said, fill up this form. And I said, I actually don't even have a pen. How do you expect me to fill this thing up? So from that, consulting to coming and doing a free soda was like a huge perk, right? Forget about the startups are doing great stuff now, but I love this. Google was, a very fun place to work. It was very challenging, a lot of hard problems to solve, but they made the environment a lot of fun, including your first day when you'll actually wear a Noogler hat for a whole week and you had to wear it in the campus for 1 week, right? So they did fun stuff, but they made us work really, really hard. It was like for most people an extension of the grad school. Right? You don't find a lot of differences. Open sitting spaces, a lot of cafeterias, a lot of lounges, that kind of an environment, slides, and you can see fun pictures and things all over the internet, right? If you see the movie Internship, you'll get a great idea of how Google works on a day-to-day basis. But more interesting things, I found when I joined there was we had to write our own promotion documents. Like this is now getting into more serious stuff. If I've done something useful, my manager doesn't have to write my promo, unlike my previous company. I have to justify and write my own promo documents as well, much like how you would do your thesis and go and defend it, as a master's or research thesis, similar thing. And a lot of focus on getting feedback from your peers, which makes cross-group collaboration very, very interesting. Today also, I spend most of my time when I talk to different companies and they're, hey, we are struggling with building products and we have dependencies and things. I tell them, how do you measure how teams are collaborating with each other? And what is the incentive that you are giving? So Google did an amazing job. You had to get reviews from your peers, which means you'll always be helpful. And that really spun up the whole thing of, yeah, I'm going to help somebody build great products. And that helps me as well. Google has a website. I encourage people to read this. If you're thinking of building products, called 10 Things We Know to Be True. Right? And this is what has basically defined pretty much from day one how they think about product. Everything is laid down as the operating guiding principles. And one of the things, a couple of them stand out to me is focus on the user. And you'll see that again and again repeated in different ways in different organizations. So focus on the user was a very important one. Don't lose sight of your customer. Don't get into internal politics. Happens to all of us, all the big companies. They keep reminding you that. Then they also focus on the fact that don't do too many things. Right? This has been something that has killed a lot of companies. Apple was also on the verge of pretty much dying at one point because they had such a massive product line they created. And that's when Steve Jobs came back and said, okay, I'm going to make this successful by actually cutting things, not adding things. And this was also the Google thing of do one thing really, really well. And I tell people in your career and things as well, focus on that one thing. And then they had the classic, don't be evil. It's a very controversial one, but I think working at that organization, I know they have been fairly true to this, most of the time in terms of, being good about whatever they want to do for the greater good of the people. The other thing which I found very unique, most companies don't do that, was very transparent organization. They had something called TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. And they did it actually on a Thursday evening, but we still called it TGIF. It was fun. The whole company would come in a very large hall. People can join remotely, and it's a very open Q&A. All the senior leadership was expected to be there. You could ask any kind of a question. Now, why is that very surprising and different? Because back in my previous company, we would generally see execs mostly once a year. We would have like a big stadium that's booked in, all these people will come, talk about the good numbers that we have done, energize everyone, and then go back. Right? It was fine, it worked well, only to the time when I saw that this little interaction opens up so much. Like we really understand what they're thinking, what's happening with these hard situations. And the fact that some of my VPs were so knowledgeable on the little things really was very, very impressive. The other thing they also did was they made it very transparent on what everybody is trying to do. They had a system of OKRs, and OKRs they have made them really, really popular. I encourage companies and people to look at how OKRs actually work. Microsoft has actually started using it now after many years. But this was not just the fact that we have these shared goals or something. Everybody in the organization had OKRs that were linked to other people's OKRs, and you could really see how your work on a day-to-day basis is impacting the organization. Like there's also a lot of other merit on using OKRs, but it was the transparency aspect, that really, really amazed me, including the use of some of the most lightweight reporting processes. Somebody like me hate writing reports. I don't know how many of you love writing reports, but on a Friday, if I've been asked to spend like 2 hours writing up a report, I'm not going to be very happy. But what Google allowed us to do was just use a very simple format of here are my 3 wins and here are my 3 losses. Put it in a tool called Snippets. I can subscribe to anybody's snippet. Anybody can subscribe to my snippets. I will get access to all my manager's reports. My manager will see whatever he wants to see. And the transparency was amazing. And again, these things help build, as you're building your products, to remove a lot of duplication, redundancy from the system, and also see, like, if I have a partner who I was expecting to deliver something to me, right? No product is built in isolation. I can just keep a tab on them by following their snippets and see if they're actually doing something or not. This made it really, really easy without any additional overhead. In terms of the innovation, Google has been an amazingly innovative company. They've really followed this whole, mantra of 10x thinking. It's very common in Google when you talk to people. How would you solve it 10x? How do you make it 10x better, 10x faster, 10x cheaper? And the way you approach a 10x problem is actually very different from making incremental changes. You have to make incremental improvements to your products all the time, but if you have to make them 10 times different, you sometimes have to flip the problems on their head and think very, very differently. And this was one way the company really encouraged that. And that's why we had tons of these moonshots where you had these balloons delivering internet, to different places. You had contact lenses, that could check your blood sugar level. So a lot of interesting self-driving cars. So all of them came out as the moonshot projects that they had. And more interestingly, I still haven't seen any other company do this well, is actually giving people 20% time to work on their favorite project. If I wanted to, like when I was in the Android team and I wanted to learn Firebase, I could actually work on that team for 20% of my time. Take a project, learn something. I want to learn sales skills. Sure, go take a 20% project from there. And a lot of interesting innovations came out because people had this little time to themselves to be creative and break the monotony of day-to-day work. So I found this extremely useful, as a very different kind of a perk. Google has been extremely data-driven. I think more data-driven than, at least to my knowledge, when I worked at Microsoft, doing a lot of A/B tests all the time. Everything was in flight, and we were comparing things for every little thing. Lot of rapid launch cycles. This was a big change. Also, I noticed from Microsoft. When I was part of the Visual Studio team many years back, sometimes it could take us 8-9 hours to actually produce vs.exe, the final output of our code. We'll check something at 10, 6 o'clock, we'll have a drop available for testing for that day. But Google was iterating almost 3, 4, 5, 7 times a day. So they had really invested heavily on these build systems. They also were pretty happy killing products, right? They didn't think twice about, hey, this product is not doing well, let's turn it off, or keep it in the beta stage for a very, very long time. So very different kind of mindset compared to what Google had. In terms of focusing on people, which is like the most important thing in product management, there's a project called the Project Oxygen. If you are a manager or want to be one, encourage you to read about this. It attributed and found traits of good managers, and it was something that they trained people to be good managers. This was a very conscious effort. Unlike many other tech companies, if you are working for 3 years, you'll become a lead and then you'll become a manager. People knew that there were different skills that were required to be a good manager. And even encouraging something simple like thanks. Everything in Google had a G in front of that. So we had a tool called the G thanks. I could actually send a thank you note to somebody. I could actually send a thank you note to their manager saying, please approve a massage for them, and that person will get a free massage. On your birthdays, you'll get a free massage. On your anniversary, you'll get a free massage. Singapore office, I'm switching to the perks here. We had a nap pod. See, look at me, happily sleeping after my journey from San Francisco. Come and rest for a while. Tons of free food. This is a great perk they had, and lots of free massages. And food was not just, hey, there's free food. Food was very culturally imbibed into the organization. We'd have celebrity chefs that would come and cook for us. And it was just felt that food and Google just go kind of hand in hand. And we looked at this term. There was a term called being googly. You can Google this. There's no official definition. But in the hiring, most of the time, people would say, oh, is this person a cultural fit? That's the question most people ask. And that was not the way we looked at things. Cultural fit means, oh, this person is going to be just like me or my team, right? There's no diversity here. But being googly included a person who would challenge the status quo, have a little bit element of fun, and bring very interesting viewpoints and ideas to the organization. That was my last. So the picture that you see, I sent it to my team the day I left Google. It said, I don't need Google. My wife knows everything. This was like my sign-off mail, and I left Google after that. Then came, working at Meta, very, very different organization. The pace at which things happened at Meta was unbelievable, right? I mean, I'm getting like from a very good paced company like Microsoft to a much faster and agile company like Google to an extremely fast organization. I mean, everything in the organization was designed to deliver value to the customers as fast as possible. Like literally on day one, we had to make some changes. That's how they, train us, change a code. 3 hours, my code was actually deployed to production. Somebody like me who had just started, in the organization was just blown away how, they had invested in the system. And they always work with this mantra of move fast and break things. This has not changed. It's polished, it's refined, but the pace is their strength. But it also comes in a very interesting way. It's called the boot camp. Again, you can do a little bit research if you ever want to go work at Facebook. You will end up working or starting in the company doing a boot camp for 6 weeks. This is the longest orientation you'll ever experience. But what they do is they basically train you on the company by starting you with simple problems to going to very complex problems. And all you do is for 4 or 5 weeks, solve different parts of the problems in the organization. So whether it's the website, it's the app, it's the marketplace, it's the Oculus. And in 5 or 6 weeks, you either decide, hey, this company is not for me. This can be very tiring, it's taxing, and you leave. Or you start making your pick on which group you want to work. It's such a win-win because now you join the organization, you understand how the big company works, you understand how different teams work, and you're very, very productive. So all engineers, product managers become extremely productive pretty quickly. It's a very expensive thing, but I think it's totally, totally worth it. Then in terms of talking about the CEO's DNA, Zuckerberg's all about hackathons. Their creativity comes from just running these 3-night marathons and let's go take a problem and solve it. And he participates even till now. He comes in quite actively and spends time. It's just amazing to see how they have continued with that culture. They also, open source everything, or most of their technology is open source, right? Surprising, people look and say, maybe I've heard of Llama recently, maybe I know a little bit of React, maybe Presto if you're on the data side of things. But my team, I was part of this group, we had close to 900 open source projects. It's a wealth of stuff they have done for the community, betterment of the community. and then just helping technology grow. The other unique thing, this is a very interesting product mindset thing that I talk about, is the poster culture. When you go to a Facebook office, you'll be surprised how many posters they have. It's just not a wall decoration. Like, you can always see something as a wall decoration, but these were subtle messages that they were sending to you as engineer, as product people, to be up your game all the time. Things like, nothing is someone else's problem, right? This is still written on the book they gave me on day one. And the whole idea was that you go to a company like some of my previous companies, you see, oh, this build system is slow. Oh, this is a problem that has been around. You don't do that kind of thing in Facebook. You are empowered, go fix it. Right? It's nobody else's problem. You take ownership, you fix it. The systems are designed well enough to make sure that you're not making goofy changes to the system, but you don't complain. The other one I love was, your journey is only 1% complete. Every time we shipped at Microsoft, we would get a Ship It award. We'll be very happy. At Facebook, we'll basically say, see, this message says your journey is only 1% complete. You've got to do a lot more for your customers, right? You go back and start building something great for them. I thought these were extremely motivating, and you can see, the kind of pace at which, Facebook delivers its product. Already talked about the engineering investments that they had made, a massively large monolithic code base. Anybody who's interested in deep engineering should definitely go and look at how beautifully they have architected this, because half the things that slow down when you're building your product is not your user story, it's not your lack of understanding your customers, it's you have a dependency on somebody else, and you're continuously trying to resolve them. So it really, really causes a lot of inertia in shipping products. So by building some of these systems, they made sure that if something has to be delivered, there's no artificial friction that comes in the system. Another interesting thing we saw, and this was something Google, I believe, also did, this was called the 2G Tuesdays. A very interesting term from that perspective. Anybody wants to guess at what a 2G Tuesday would be? Any wild guesses? Okay, the crowd is not awake yet fully. So 10 years ago, one of the biggest challenges these companies were facing was to, what we used to call after, is go after the next billion users. Right? Billion, who were the billion users? People in Southeast Asia, predominantly India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Nepal. You call anybody a developing country at that point. The biggest challenge was the lack of internet speed. Right? And here I am, like I'm a product person. I have been asked to build m.facebook.com, and I know how to write code. I have React, I have whatever tools, and I build and ship it. Right? I'm trying it, it works great. Ask your friend in India to start using it, and you're like, oh my God, this is taking ages to load. You'll see that today in so many apps, right? You're traveling and it's painfully slow. Look at any of the apps these companies have done, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's m.facebook.com. They started with making these investments that, while you are in US, great, I can't tell you what that slow speed is going to be, but I'm going to throttle the Wi-Fi today to a 2G speed. And when you're forced to work on that, that's when you start thinking, oh my God, this is really, really slow. You get that first-hand pain, and people then start improving their product significantly. So a small thing, but it really connects you to the customer. And again, as I said, product management is all about understanding and building for your customer. And this was, I thought, a great way of building that. And then perks-wise, I think, there are tons of things. Free laundry was one of the most interesting ones. But I generally call something called the free food plus plus. It's not free food, it's free food plus plus. Anybody wants to make a guess on plus plus? I think it wakes up at least the engineering folks. Like, every time a plus plus comes in, they're like, what, new language, new food? So free food was a big thing. I said, at least all companies in Bay Area are doing free food, right? So Google was doing free food, and then how do you compete with free food as a perk, right? Most of the time I ask this question, people are like, oh yeah, you give 2 extra dishes. Okay, good answer, I think, but it's not the right answer. So what they actually did was, every Wednesday, you and 4 people from your team can actually go out of the campus and eat and reimburse that. Right? Imagine how this is like really pampering. I feel sometimes proud, sometimes I feel like a little embarrassed, but these have been great perks, right, to the tech people they've given. I know a lot of these have been cut down. So, if you're now looking at going to Facebook, do check if they're doing all these good things or not. But most tech companies have cut down on perks, but I still feel that they have made sure that people are happy, they work together. And again, I tell people that this was not about free food. Again, a lot of people look at food and say, oh, this is free food. The fact that 4 or 5 of us would go together, we will sit down, we'll have conversation, either it's the same team or different teams, you will see the productivity of people go up significantly. So behind the scene, right, if you are going to be running an organization, think of this as a great way to bring your people together. Half the products have shown that have failed, but because people could not work together and deliver them, more than an engineering failure or understanding of the user failure. So keep some of these things in mind, going to be very helpful. Amazon, again, moving from a very fast-moving company, I think, to I would say, a fairly bureaucratic company, right? But in all good ways, right? It's the way they worked. I shouldn't be complaining, but it was a different style altogether. In all honesty, I hated the 2 years I was there. If it's getting recorded, I'm sorry, but that was it. But after 2 years, I also reflected on how much I actually learned in those 2 years on building products, understanding customers and processes. I think it was my hindsight, short-sightedness, and 2 years I did not appreciate it as much. I go back and I look and say, oh my God, every little thing they did was very well thought through. For a large company of their size, all these processes, systems they had put together, I maybe came from a very different experience, how companies work. But a company of this scale really had to think very hard. And I started appreciating and understanding a lot about, how things actually happen. And I'll talk to you about, a couple of them here as well. So as I said, the first one was all about leadership principles. Right? If you ever decide that you're going to interview at Amazon, you have to understand leadership principle. In fact, the recruiter will actually send you a link and say, please read this, please understand this. All your interview questions will be around that. But outside of that, this is what helped the company, the large company, over 1 million total people, I think 200 plus 200,000 in AWS alone, could actually engage, interact, and collaborate with any team because we all understood the same language. And these are very, very thoughtful principles. Like every letter that Jeff Bezos has written to the shareholders is a gold mine of information. So much about how he builds products, how he thinks about the company, how he thinks about the culture is all there. And I don't think any company can beat the customer obsession that they had. Every company has customer focus, right? They're successful because they know their customer. Amazon is successful because they're obsessed by their customers. And there's a difference, when you're obsessed, that is your focus. Like they would not even put employees anywhere close to in terms of how much value they provide. If there's a decision that negatively impacts the employees and positively impacts the customers will always win. Very, very clear guidelines on that. And that's why you see the kind of things that they have shipped to us. We all love, using that. Started with, interesting thing. Here's an empty chair, right? Most meetings that senior leadership had, these stories are there. They would keep an empty chair, and the empty chair represented a customer. When you are arguing about something, somebody would pause and say, what would the customer really say in this regards? And so you're forced to wear a different hat doing that. This is all again part of their leadership principle. Disagree and commit. Large companies, very hard to get 100% alignment. So somebody will be, a bar raiser who will come in and say, I disagree, with what you're doing, but I will now wholeheartedly commit to supporting you. There's no such thing, yeah, okay, I don't like it, but I set it on paper and I'm not going to do this and try and sabotage this. You will never see that, right? So that's a very strong values that they have created. Highly data driven, even for a team that I worked on, we would have at least 25 spreadsheets that we would look at every Thursday on every little movement. So we were doing hiring. How many students have applied? How many have gone through interviews? How many got rejected? And every percentage was measured, their delta was measured. And in case we saw an anomaly, okay, this week we have had a dip in something, or suddenly this process is going to be a bottleneck and we don't have so many interviewers. Well, I have to interview 30,000 students. That's 150,000 interviews to be conducted. They would track and measure and fix everything very fast, extremely data driven. And they also made sure that, it's easy, when you're a large company, everybody has an opinion, everybody has a say. by making single-threaded owners, they made sure there's accountability that rests on a person. And trust me, in large companies, when you have to make decisions, you cannot do it by consensus. It just slows things down. So having that really, really helps. A lot of companies do a product owner. They used to call it the single-threaded owner. And then reflecting on every failure. If something goes wrong, which is either a web service goes down or a process fails, they'll do what's called the correction of errors. Really, really reflect on what went wrong, how should we fix that, and have it fully documented for future teams to look at. And big investments, but I think it works really, really well. The other thing I think which I have been, I think, a big advocate now is of their working backwards process. And there's actually a good book by the same name, Working Backward. Encourage anybody doing product to definitely read that. They start with customer in mind. I said the customer obsession thing is very hard. Typically, if you have a new idea that you're coming up with, generally I've seen two approaches people take. You come up with something and I'm your manager or your lead. So you'll come up and say, hey, Amit, I have this idea. And either you'll make a small prototype and show it to me. Look, I'll show you something. That's a very classic thing. You've coded something, you're a hacker, and you love to do that. Or if you're not a hacker, you're not a coder, you'll come up with a PowerPoint, you'll write some Figma and say, look, I have this idea. And that's how you start with. At Amazon, you'd always start by writing a press release. That's how you come up with a new idea. And that really forces you to think very, very hard of what exactly am I building? And you take yourself in a real time. So if I'm building a product and I think I could make it in 2 years, you'll actually put a date that says June 2027, New York. And here is my press release. And just by writing that, it forces you to think much harder than writing any kind of a PowerPoint, a Figma, because now you're focusing on the solution and you're locking yourself versus just opening up to what is the problem I'm solving for my customer. So take that approach, read about that. And a lot of it in Amazon is about writing. Everything is some form of a document that you have to present, whether it is a meeting that you're attending. You would rarely do a PowerPoint. A document will be handed off. For the first 20 minutes, everybody reads. It's called the silent read time in a meeting. And then you have a discussion, either online or in person. They actually used to hand out real papers in meetings that you write your questions on. Very unique way of doing that. But you have to love writing. If you hate writing, I can tell you'll be frustrated like a lot of people. Again, engineering-wise, they made great investments as well. Two pizza team is very classic. Basically the idea is you have small teams that you can feed with 2 pizzas. A few teams are exceptions like mine because I love pizza. I used to get 1 extra. So mine was a 3 pizza team, but most teams were 2 pizza team. They did the monolithic architecture, web services, you spin up your service. You take very little dependencies on anybody else. And the whole idea is that you build a service, you own it end to end. There is no support. There is no other organization. It's your part to understand how you're building it and how you're maintaining it. Put a lot of accountability on the teams to build great products. So this was interesting. Let's talk about perks. Shall we? Okay, there weren't actually any. Yeah, unfortunately, right? I mean, frugality is one of the leadership principles. Right? And there were really no real perks. I mean, I say real perks because at one point they started doing free bananas. So if you are in Seattle, there's a big stall outside each of the offices you can get. This is in partnership with the city. Still like it. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? And then during COVID, I say 1 free coffee, and I emphasize that, it's 1 free coffee. They were like very hardcore about that. So it was not that they didn't give perks, but they thought through about a lot of these things, right? So you can see now, in this comparison, how each of the company has operated quite differently when they're building and delivering these products. If you're just trying to understand, what happens to user stories, what happens to the tools they use, I can tell you all 4 companies use different processes. Any process, any methodology, anything you pick will actually work, right? As long as you understand whether it's agile, whether it's waterfall. We have done waterfall, we have done agile, different groups inside different companies. But it is literally the structure around all of these that enable you to ship things fast or will make you slow, or you'll suddenly lose a lot of people from your team and cannot deliver things to your customer. So To wrap up, I have a few slides, and then we'll basically open it up for questions. So once I do, these kind of this presentation, most of the time people are like, oh, these are like different big companies, right? It's true, right? You can't copy their products, right? They have built such great products. It's a reality. Products may be smaller, different. You can't hire their talent. Most people come and say, oh, they poach almost everybody from the universities, and I don't get the same talent. Fair enough. Their scale, obviously, also is a strength. Could be a weakness, but it's largely a strength for them. And also, they have very unique cultures. Like all of them, as you saw, work and operate differently. How they treat that. But this is not something you should worry about, right? You can't copy their products, but you can really understand the systems. And this is what I talk about. Like, how do they operate end to end? How do they work and build things, taking all the way from what a customer wants to how do you deliver value? When I talk to people about what product management really is, right? It's basically delivering value to your customers in a way that your businesses can sustain it. That's the important part. So what can you do, right? Like they did not invent e-commerce, but they invented the working backward process, right? So you understand, like for your organization, what is it that you can do? They didn't invent search, but they invented OKRs and 20% time to speed up the whole thing. So you can take some ideas of that. Same thing, you can't hire talent, but in terms of how do you groom, how do you develop your talent is something that each organization can do themselves. Microsoft really focuses now on the whole growth mindset. Since Satya has come in, they've made a huge change in terms of just making people feel more empowered, more in control of things. You can do some of those things. And the discipline, right? Some of this is all about discipline. Amazon worked the same way 10 years, 12 years ago. It was two pizza teams. Even when they have hit 300,000 people, still operating at that level. So some of these things you can learn quite well by understanding, what is the truth behind what is the thing that they're trying to really do and achieve. Same thing, the culture, right? This is something, at least the more senior people needs to understand at different level. If you're a team manager, what's your team culture like? Yeah, look at a meeting. How are the dynamics in the meeting? When a young person presents an idea, are they comfortable enough to do that or not? Right? Is that going to fuel innovation properly? Do I have the right systems to take care of that or not? So a lot of these things, when Microsoft went through a major shift from Steve Ballmer to Satya, it was not an accidental shift. They deliberately looked at the process. They looked at how we do the review cycles. Why do we have these bell curves that we have created, and fix those things? So same thing from your perspective, no matter what size, scale of team you are, these are the dimensions you start, kind of reflecting upon. So what I say is, hey, observe for the next couple of weeks, right? There's no one magic bullet that works for every person here, every organization. It's all going to be different. But it starts with three very basic things. You first start with just auditing things, right? Things around you. How are things happening today? Most people, would have ideas of, hey, these are some of the problems. Here's where we suck. You could literally go into a room and get a group of people together, and used to do these post-it things where say, this thing works well, this thing doesn't well. We should improve this. We should throw these out, like the classic consulting grid. So understand, and you can do across, hiring rituals. You can look at meeting rituals. You can actually see, where do we use data to make decision? Where does a more senior person come and thump their fist on the room and walk away, and a decision is made? So the first thing is just knowing, your organization, your team, how that works. Then I think you intentionally go into designing. You identify the problem that you have spotted, right? It could be whatever in different organization. Design a ritual around that. So if there's a problem you see in how decisions happen, take an idea and see how we can fix that, right? If there's a lot of issues with cross group, see how you can fix them. If you see we are delivering really slow, could we actually build a slightly better engineering system? And then, like the classic, experimentation, take this as a product, and then test this thing out, right? You implement it and you see, is it giving me the desired results or not? What is the one thing that I noticed that has changed? So if you follow this very basic systematic process, you will start refining your product system, how you build systems, how you deliver value. And obviously, as I said, there's so many things these large companies have done. There's always nuggets of things that you can pick from them and say, oh, maybe I should try this. Like maybe I should give people more time to work, on a free project, or maybe I should throw some interesting perks like a free banana for people. Maybe it works for you. So with that, I would wrap up and open this up for question. As I said, start small, measure impact, and scale what works. And this is going to be very unique to each one of you, each one of your organization. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to answer questions now or later. If you come up with something, I'll be more than happy to do that. Thank you very much for this.
Great,
How do you want to do questions?
Okay, yeah, so our 2 classes will be leaving us now, right? Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
So we'll have some mics in the room as well, but I got your questions on the QR code as well. John, you can also change the slide again to the feedback. And also the rest of you, even if you don't want to submit a question, you can vote on the questions, right? Whatever interests you. So it'll be good to get your input. The first one I have that got some interest is, what is common about how these companies put out great products, and what can the traditional tech companies in digital transformation learn from them?
Yeah, I think the one most common thread that I've seen across all these companies, I think it should have come out from the presentation as well, has been focus on the customer, right? For me to reiterate something like, Microsoft, for example, builds products for millions and millions of users, right? You can't go and talk to everybody, but then how do we invest in programs where we can have representatives of those customers come and talk to us? Google had, I used to run the Google Developer Group, for example, part of that team. And they would also, again, go to the community, talk to them, different parts of the world, and learn. Amazon, obviously, extremely customer obsessed. So the answer to the other question is more interesting. Like, what should I be thinking about? I think what you need to start looking at is, how am I? Like, how is my engineer? Take one engineer from your team and say, how does this person actually know or understand the customer that he or she is building the product for? Like, just answer that question. Whatever the answer you get will actually tell you how closely they are connected. Now, sometimes, yes, an engineer is not a person you could then start sending off to sit on customer sites, but could you do something lightweight? And I'll tell you what, almost all the teams I worked at Microsoft, we used to have a Friday afternoon where the line would be open, and that's where the support calls are coming in to the support team. The engineers can just listen into say the Microsoft Teams line or the Microsoft Vista line and just get a feel for 30-40 minutes. If you want to enforce something like that as a behavior that people are doing constantly, then I tell people that put that as part of the review process. At the end of 6 months, ask them, like, how many customer support cycles did you listen into? What were 2 or 3 things you actually did based on those things, just to kind of reinforce that thing. But I think building that connection is fast. That's very important. And as I said, most other companies, friction is a huge thing. As you're shipping things, you'll have to understand like how many controls and processes you go through before what you thought is of value to customer to the fact that they can actually start using it and kind of identify that. And that's not generally an easy problem, but you'll find a lot of places where you can fix these things. You'll see whether it's an engineering issue that is coming up, it's a decision-making issue that's coming up. You'll be able to identify on those.
Most important thing to be close to
customer. Yeah, I mean, you have to understand, like, no matter what, sometimes like, oh, I'm not like Microsoft shipping those. You're still building a product that somebody has to use, right? Even if you're making an API endpoint, another API endpoint by somebody is going to be use that, a developer is going to be coding against it. How well do you understand that particular developer? What tools are they using? What problem are they really trying to solve? Is what makes you a great product manager. As you start reflecting and opening these layers of information. One of the slides I generally have talking about this is I say a great product manager on my team would have X-ray vision. And the whole idea is that they need to be able to really look at a customer and see through the problems that they are facing. You're solving for problems, and the better you can do that, the more successful you are as a product and the more successful you are as a product manager.
Great, yeah, thanks. Also, a lot of people want to know about sort of where things go wrong. So the question is, with so many like different flavors of amazing processes, right? People and culture and the perks or lack of them. How do these great companies get such big bets wrong still, like the Fire Phone, Google Plus, or
Yeah,
any others?
yeah, absolutely. As I said, I've touched upon a number of those products. I've worked on a number of those products, which we always thought were, we know the customer, we are building for the right thing. Um, each of these products have failed for very different reasons. Some of the classic ones were just bad timing. Sometimes you are too early or too late to the market. Right? Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball that says you have this is the right time and you have to deliver. You know these things in hindsight. Oh, I shipped this. VMs came in 1970s as well. I don't know anybody used it at that time or used it the same way. Java was there just at the right time. Java also tried to make the network is the computer message. I think they were 10 years too early to do that. So I think nobody has a crystal ball, but most of these companies would refine and have a failure and invest in learning a lot from them. That's one of the things I've seen they do quite well is on the face of it, you may see, oh yeah, Vista was a bad product and we didn't do a lot of driver testing, compatibility testing, but they learned from that. They made sure that their councils that are giving them feedback, tracking that feedback is all documented, and we don't make that same mistake again. And the thing is, you have to take these big, bold bets. That's part of the game. No company can innovate, if you are risk averse. You have to make bold bets. You have to accept the fact that things would fail. The question really comes is, as a company, are you learning from them? At Amazon, the CEO process, the correction of errors process was all about reflecting on your mistakes. It was not about pointing fingers at people and saying, hey, it's your fault, it's your fault. Something happened. How do you make sure we do this right the next time? So failures have happened. We've had one of the products I worked for, very early product in Microsoft. We basically, the culture was that we're not going to talk to customers like this is our secret product. If somebody hears and knows about it, somebody will build it. I see a lot of startups still do that and have that mentality. And when we came up with the product, we realized that this is not what the customer really needed. And we were so late in the game after 20 months of development. It's not something you can just go back and fix. These are 50, 60 people working on it. And in the meantime, another company had come up with an easier, different way of solving that. So in hindsight, we were slow. We were not talking to customers enough and getting their feedback. And how did we fix that? Yeah, every Friday, basically, for the next couple of years, we started bringing customers and just showing them something that we are working on. So it's pretty much, hey, this is not a finished product. Don't wait for the end. Can I show you something incremental and take feedback from you? So that's the way we have handled it. Most companies have handled it very, very well to learn from these, obvious not successful products. Again, I don't call them failures. They did what they did, but not as successful as the others. Clippy was too way ahead of its time, I guess. Today, we use ChatGPT for asking questions. Clippy tried to do the same thing 30 years ago. I don't even know if half the people may not even know Clippy, but it was a tool inside of Office. As you started typing, it would kind of, hey, it looks like you are trying to write a letter. Do you need help? And you're like, yes. And it will say, dear, and then it'll just stop there. It was not like the smartest of things, but I think they had the idea and the vision that these things would come out. And as technology evolves, as we say, computing is cheap, processing is cheap, hardware is cheap, and suddenly things we thought 30 years ago would be possible are now happening. Right? You've got such smart things coming out. So timing and missing out on your customer are the two key things.
Great. Switch basically from like organizational level to the role product manager. The product manager is expected to do everything, right? Because they own the product. Is this a myth? What is in scope and what's out of scope?
Yeah. I think with the product management definition, I think anybody can get into a pretty holy discussion on that topic, right? It's like, but I think as I start and I mentioned, I probably called it out during the talk as well. I look at a product manager's role as somebody who's delivering value to customers, right? Whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's documentation, delivering something of value that somebody else is going to use, and you are delivering it in a way that's financially responsible. This is the part I add as well, right? Like if I'm shipping a service, AWS web service, yeah, I can give you a way to run functions endlessly. Great. Now, how much is it costing my company? Right? Can I sustain? Is it profitable? So, as a product manager, you've got to kind of think on these sides. And that's why the most common thing that comes out is, oh, you are the CEO of the product, right? That's the worst thing. I mean, but it's also technically right because you don't control anything, but you have to think like a CEO. A CEO is constantly thinking about making their customers happy. They're also responsible for the P&L to pretty much the largest extent, whether it's the CFO running it, but you still are responsible for that. So now it's quite interesting. Like one of the slides when I do the product management talk, the more specific product mindset talk, I generally start my slide by saying product management, what is not product management? And we start talking about marketing is not product management, engineering is not, and design is not. And you're yet expected to know and understand all three, which is the truth, right? If you are a product manager, you will be interfacing with at least these three entities, at least in the tech world. There'll be an engineering side, there'll be a marketing side, and there'll be a design side. And in a lot of the companies, the product manager kind of tries to fit between these three roles. And what happens is most people come up inherently have one area which is strong to them. If you're coming from somebody who understands the domain very well, you may be great on the marketing side. Like if you have been tinkering with UX in your college, you maybe think I'm very strong in this particular area. Or if you have been writing code for many, many years, you more on that side. So now there is no one definition of what's expected out of a product manager. Each company does it very, very differently, but it is going to be some combination of this triangle where you fit in. And also depends on if you have a very strong engineering manager, you maybe don't need that kind of a strength. But you have to be able to really, the key thing is to be able to translate and spot a customer's problem. You have to be able to take it to the engineering team. You have to be able to prioritize how you're going to address fixing those problems. That's, I think, the hardest thing I expect a product manager to do is, in more official terms, you call it the grooming the backlog. Right? I have 15 things to solve. Right? Which one should I solve first? Right? It's never an either or thing. Oh, should I do this versus should I do that? You have 15 problems, stack rank and tell me, why you're solving this problem first, because each problem is going to take different resources, will take different time, will give different benefits to the company and the customer. So for a product manager, I think that's the biggest strength to have on an operational basis on a day-to-day, is being able to provide that clarity to all the stakeholders that here are all the customer problems we have identified. This is how I've stacked rank, and this is why we are going to start with this versus this. This is my rationale behind that.
Makes a lot of sense. And to follow up, staying with the role for a moment, how do you think AI, Gen AI, will shape?
Yeah, so yeah, I think this is now being talked a lot in terms of how AI in general is going to impact just software development, product creation. I think right now, I think one of the things that we are seeing, and I think all the product managers I work with, a lot of the things that took time on the product manager are getting simplified by AI. It's a useful, super productive tool that you can add to your belt. Your companies may decide which ones you can use sometimes, because this is all about what data you're putting in, what kind of things you want from it. Each company may have different guidelines, but people are really understanding that if I had 10,000 pieces of feedback on user voice that I got on my product, I can really feed it to AI and at least get the first level pass done. Right? This is the most basic thing I've seen most product managers started to do, was distill user feedback. Right? That's the most basic thing. And then more sophisticated tools are coming out. Prototyping is the next most painful thing. Right? You have an idea. How do you quickly come up with something that you can show to a customer? Well, there are a lot of great tools that have started to speed that up. Now you can build 3, 4, 5 of these in literally minutes. Things that took days to weeks before that. So that's productive time. I think where things would change is when the tools become even more smarter and start anticipating certain things, right? You can actually give it a screen and ask it to analyze and say, tell me where all the customer is going to have a problem, right? What should I do? Or AI systems built in, like we do telemetry, AI systems built into the products, which are just analyzing how users are using that. I talk about more of a hypothetical scenario, but eventually at some day we'll see that with these apps, right? You're using Instagram, I'm using Instagram. We probably use it differently. We still all see the same app, right? Now, if I'm a product manager and somebody says, no, build one for this type of customer, then this type of customer, then this type of customer, it's going to be a mess. But that's where AI probably comes in and says, I can understand how Amit uses and I can mask certain things, I can surface certain things. My experiences become more personalized. So I think eventually we'll see a lot more of that hyper personalization things happening by AI. Product managers kind of controlling and managing a lot of these agents. But today it's mostly all my repetitive work gets easy, and I would say absolutely, if you're not using it today, first thing you should start doing is understanding the tools in this domain that you can start playing around with.
One question also asks about the organizational impact or the operational impact on company level of AI, right? You just addressed mostly on maybe customer research and getting to know the customer. Anything else on, for the way companies operate where AI will dramatically change?
Yeah, I think generally, we started playing around in a couple of my companies many years back. And of course, the tools are moving very, very rapidly. So even, some of my talks, I just look back at my slides, from 6 months ago. There are things that exist today that were just not there. And 6 months is not even a timeline, right? So most of the companies, I think right now, the biggest struggle has been, where is all this thing going to settle, right? Everybody's coming up with a new model. Almost every week, a big jump is happening, right? Everybody's like AGI would happen, some kind of, intelligence, super intelligence will start, come out. With that, the bigger challenges that companies are facing, like all big companies are always worried about privacy and security. Who has access to data? Where is the data going? How is this coming out? The second degree of things that people are still worried about is things like hallucinations. How do you spot hallucination, right? Okay, if you're doing chat GPT, which is what most people think is, AI, you can see it, right? It's happening and you're like, that doesn't seem right. But now imagine if, this is part of a very large agentic workflow. So I did, training a couple of months back on Crew.ai on building these 4 agents, which were like mini customer support agents and a supervisory agent. So there are 5 agents that have to be coordinated through script. And the idea is that they'll take some feedback on a chat and they'll respond to the customer, and then the supervisory agent actually monitors that. So I played around with the prompt injection where I basically said, after every response, throw in a joke. See, that was a bad thing, right? No big company would like that. But we also had the supervisory agent whose job was to, before these messages go out, please check for professionalism. And so companies will have to start thinking about how these new workflows will start to happen. Most companies are in that stage now. I see, who are trying to understand what are people working on, what are the things that AI can, kind of supplement and speed up pretty quickly. So companies are still worried about this whole governance, like when is a model deployed? All the responses are non-deterministic in nature, unlike software programs where input, fixed input is fixed output. Here, every time, your prompt will, give you something different. How do you make sure after 6 months, that you know exactly what happens, the logs, the systems? So this is a huge opportunity space, especially for the large vendors, especially for the IT companies. But this is what most companies are looking for and saying, how do we have these systems? Plus, a lot of the standardization protocols are also being evolved, right? We are very early in this technology. Claude came up with, Anthropic came up with the whole MCP architecture. I'm sure somebody will come up with another way in which these services communicate, and you can track, their cost, their effectiveness. Cost is another big one that doesn't get talked, but every query costs money. It's not happening for free. Chat GPT also, if you ask 20 questions, will say, come back at 5 p.m. tomorrow. You're done for the day. You can't have that in the organization, right? Your customers, agent is sleeping right now. At the same time, you can't also endlessly have a loop where, this thing is just running and every query is costing you money. So while companies are seeing that there's a lot of potential, I think they're also trying to wait for these things to settle down and then adapt their workflows and processes based on that. And this is like mostly an organizational level decision, like even what tools you can use, what data you can share, what kind of, like if you're a highly regulated industry, it's going to be much harder. You're in finance, you're in medical, you're not going to put your customers X-ray and then say, hey, tell me what's going on that. Someday you might, but today I don't think that's feasible from a process perspective. technically yes, but you just won't be allowed to do that.
Interesting outlook for sure. Yeah. I think a lot of the folks hear you, right? The message very clear and especially with the customer centricity and all. But then how to put that into practice in the organization for those who haven't seen the talk, for example, right? How do we get started? How do we get buy-in? How do we convince management or the rest of the company? Where do we start even?
Yeah, I think most of the time I've seen, we call this basically things that happen at the ground level are very interesting. Like a lot of technology adoption I've seen happens when people start using it, and, they do it, IT doesn't like it generally, but people, come up with some simple things and then we are able to demonstrate, the value that this thing is going to bring. So if you're a product manager, obviously, don't violate your company guidelines and principles on, when you should use AI and for what, but see if you can actually use something and show your leadership, how quickly now you're able to build and do something. And those small wins are the ones that would then help you get a bigger adoption. People are seeing the time, what kind of things you can do. I also tell companies that, do a small hackathon. I've come from a culture where hackathon and building things is how new ideas are generated. So why not in a controlled environment, give people 2 or 3 days and say, we're going to use these new tools, right? And see what we can deliver. And then have people kind of look at it and say, oh, wow, this really saves me time. This has made me more efficient. Or we just came up with a new way approach of doing things. A mix of combination of these things, work very, very well. But if you are able to kind of show value from the ground up, I think it's always been, very, very successful. Like when I seen like big build systems being overtaken by GitHub because everybody just started using it and we realized, yeah, this is perfect. And obviously Microsoft went and, acquired that at, some point in time. But it was just because it was solving real world problems for you or your customers. So try and experiment with some of these tools today. Don't try to boil the ocean as they call it. Try with something small, a very unique problem that you're running or your team is running, and see how some of these new tools can help you out.
I know this is a painful point for a lot of you. So whoever asked the question, I'm sure many of you are thinking it. Does this make sense? Like somewhere to start from the ground up, demonstrate the value.
Yeah, work with your organization. I'd say because these are very expensive and some of them are sensitive tools, right? It doesn't make sense to just go out and start doing things and putting your entire customer file or your company data on ChatGPT and then only for it to be showing up on somebody else's query will be a very embarrassing thing, right? So make sure you understand your industry, your processes, but in whatever that is, in a sandbox kind of an environment, try and experiment with a small problem. Pick one and as I said, pick one, solve for it and then iterate, see how that actually works for you.
I think one of the challenges is like, when do I have the time to do that, right? So there's one follow-up question on the 20%. In reality, is it 20% or is it more like 120%?
140, I would say. Yeah, nobody talks about that. No, that is true. Most of when we say 20% is not, most people, in tech companies work long hours, right? And, most people never would, never have seen anybody do a 40-hour job at any of these companies. And nobody's keeping track on these things. 20% is a very symbolic thing, basically saying that we encourage you to go work on things that you are passionate about as well. More than the fact that I'm trying to say, oh, 80% here, 20% there, it kept my mind and most people very, very sharp. It gave me a lot of understanding of how another team operates. Like when I sat in some of the Firebase meetings, I was amazed because they were a startup we had acquired. And the thing that really caught my attention was the first meeting, they are sitting there and first thing they do is, let's talk about our mission. So every time they got into a meeting, they had the mission slide up there. It's such a small thing, but again, reinforcing the reason why this team exists. Like, why are we building something? Who are we building for? And so you can learn a lot. So 20% is really a huge win-win for the company. It's a huge win for you as a person if you want to learn something. But again, it's very hard to implement. As an organization, it's been deep in their culture, as an organization to do that. Most companies would struggle, like consulting companies, if you're nickeling, diming every minute and tracking timesheets and things, then it's a 120% thing and people would not like it. This is more about I am creative, right? I need a creative outlet, and the company makes sure they support you on that. So you have to, if you're creative, I'm sure you'll find ways to do that. Get into a small project, build something with your team. Depending on how rigid or flexible your organization is, talk to your manager and say, hey, we have an idea. I've seen many companies, if you approach in a more systematic way and ask for some resources, some amount of time, companies will find some way. Show them value, like, hey, this is something that will help my customer. I just need to experiment. I need this much of time, and these are the results I'm going to show you. This is how we did it in Google as well, quite a bit. I had a new idea for a project, for an agency program, and my manager was like, yeah, give me some OKRs, here's 3 months, and if you don't meet it, tell me, what you learned, and then we'll figure out, a different project. And that thing took off because, we kind of experimented with that.
I'm going to pick one more. I think this is a great one for closing as well. Very open. I'm also very interested in this. What is the biggest career lesson you learned?
Biggest career lesson? First of all, I need to find where I kept my phone. Oh, my phone is right here. I was like, okay, it's looking very odd on the white thing. I was looking at the time, I said, why did somebody else put the same timer as I had? No, I ticked it because I want to make sure before we go, we take a selfie with the room. I forgot once, so we'll do that. So I think biggest lesson I learned working for these companies is, I think, adapting to the organization is very, very important. As I said, in Amazon, I got a little frustrated. It was like, hey, this is not my style. I want to move things fast. I'm not going to do things this way. Was not the right approach, right? And I should have taken the time to understand that they also want to solve for the customer. They are also building value. This is what I did in my previous companies. We just did it differently. And I think understanding and appreciating those is very, very important to be successful and make your skills more transferable. And I think that was, for me personally, a great career lesson. I also, I think, was very fortunate that I've worked in so many different types of products. Everything from, hey, something for the students, something for the enterprises, something which is a crypto exchange, right? Completely different set of people. And yet I could see there's so much of similarity in how we have to build and deliver value to the customer. So if you get a chance, I always encourage, learn different styles of working, especially when you're in the early stage of your career. Go around, look at different ways things are built, different products, but at the same time, have something that stands out as your own strength. Build some kind of a domain expertise. Build something where people will be like, oh, this person understands this thing. Great, he knows a lot about other stuff, but what is the one thing that this person is really, really good at? And that's like generally an advice I give to a lot of students who are like, I want to do this, I want to do this. But what's your USP going to be as an individual? Like, what would you stand out for?
Great. That's, I think, very good for
Okay. Yeah, I know. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. We can take the conversation up to level 3 as well, where we have the bit of a food and drink prepared, and happy to have all of you for chats and networks. And Amit will be around.
Yeah, I'll be there in a few minutes, right?
Yeah,
I need a few minutes here, and
yeah,
then I'll show up, and we can do more Q&A. Just get hold of me, and if you have my LinkedIn as well, feel free to drop me a note, and be happy to answer your questions. So thank you once again. This was very nice. I felt great being here. Thank you for spending the afternoon.